Now, coming up, listen to this. This is crazy. She quit her job as a high-powered executive, actually as a lawyer, and then she turned into a New York Times bestselling author. This is a fairy tale story, I guess, but it's actually real at the same time. So stay tuned and learn how our next skip actually managed to do what she really loved to. I guess with that, it leads me to the introduction of Suzanne Kane, which is a former corporate lawyer. Now, in 2015, she announced her launch of her mini mission-based organization, Quiet Revolution, that aims to change the lives of introverts by empowering them with information tools and resources they need to survive and thrive. Now, Suzanne is the author of 2 New York Times bestselling books, with Quiet hitting the #1 spot and Bittersweet, How Sorrow and Longing Makes Us Whole, changing the way we think. Welcome, Suzanne, to our show. Oh, we have a sound problem here.
No, we don't. We don't. Hello. Thank you so much. It is great to be here with all of you.
It's a pleasure. Listen, we've spent a lot of time studying things, but one of the topics you've studied, which is so unusual but so relevant, is the idea of introverts. Mm-hmm. What did you discover?
Oh gosh, so much. I mean, well, first of all, I discovered that the premise of the book that I wrote about it, Quiet, like, is really true, because I kept hearing about it once the book came out from thousands and thousands of people that that so many people feel that there is a mismatch between their way of being and their own preference of how they want to spend their time, and the way in which they feel they're supposed to spend that time, and that leads to a colossal waste of talent and energy and happiness. Another thing that I discovered is that so many people are walking around feeling this way, and it's often people who you wouldn't expect. And I discovered this, right after my book came out. I gave this TED talk about it, about quiet and introversion, and I came off the stage and I found myself suddenly surrounded by all these CEOs and sort of master of the universe types who frequent the TED conference, all coming up to tell me that they too are sort of secret introverts, and nobody knows this about them, because they're all kind of like presenting a very extroverted face to the world. But over these years, I've become the world's confessor of these types, and I hear about these stories. So if you're out there listening and you think this is you, I will tell you, you're very much not alone.
I want to have a question for actually both of you, because one of the most absurd books ever written in history is called The Secret. Now, if you haven't read The Secret, it's sold, last time I checked, 7 million copies, right? A complete nonsense book, The Secret. And the essence of The Secret is, if I envision it, it will happen. Now, you mentioned, both of you have talked about kind of the fallacy of just positive thinking. And what they did in The Secret is, for example, Jim envisioned being a basketball champion, and he was. And Mary envisioned cancer would go away, and it did. And Jane wanted to be a movie star, and she envisioned it did. Of course, they didn't interview the million dead people who envisioned the cancer would go away. They didn't interview the 1,000 waitresses in Hollywood who envisioned movie stars, and they didn't interview any of the players that lost. All they did is talk to the winners. It's basically, he did this, he is successful, therefore, if you do this, you will be, which is all complete nonsense. So both of you, I think, are 2 of the few authors who've actually dealt with this and kind of said, you don't have to go through life pretending all the time. So I hope what I'm saying is making some sense to you. I'd like to get both of your thoughts on this. Susan, you go first.
Well, I don't know. I mean, it's an interesting question. I don't believe, as The Secret says, and I haven't read the book, but the idea that whatever you think, it's going to automatically manifest. But I do think at the same time, I just came across the other day this quote by the
3 minutes if you do.
By the poet Mary Oliver, and I don't remember the exact words of it, but she was basically saying, the people who feel the most intense regrets at the end of their lives are the ones who had some kind of creative impulse or creative drive that they never saw through.
Yes.
And I do think that that is those are words worth heeding. And that doesn't mean that, you have the idea early in life that you're going to be a great concert pianist or whatever it is, and you're necessarily going to see yourself at Carnegie Hall one day. But I do think that there are always ways to manifest the creative impulses or just the impulses that we have to be generative and productive, and that it actually is crucial to follow those through. And there's always a way of doing that. So maybe it's like a more realistic version of what The Secret was talking about.
Oliver, what's your thought?
Well, I was just struck by you were talking about the sort of the selection bias side of this, which has always intrigued me. I wrote in an earlier book about how, you hear this idea that we should be willing to embrace failure because it's crucial on the road to success. And I think there's a lot of truth in that, but you very rarely, you only ever hear it from people who've gone on to turn that failure into immense success. You don't hear from the people who just failed. And I wonder if there's one of the things that strikes me about Susan was writing about in her earlier book is that there's this, we also, I think, live in a world of selection bias when it comes to the way that that extroverts. I don't quite understand where I fall on that scale. I feel like I'm changing all the time, but history is written by the extroverts in a certain sense. There's another kind of if you're naturally quiet, then you're less likely to have sort of made the pronouncements that we use to decide how things really work. And actually, you could be doing as you showed in that book, some of the most important work and some of the most interesting things. But again, it's just that sort of like, well, of course, people who are shouting about stuff all the time are going to be the ones who you hear shouting about stuff all the time. I think this phenomenon just kind of repeats itself through all aspects of human life. I mean, it's just yeah, we have a very distorted view of things because of who we hear from the most.
I guess I would respectfully disagree with one point that you just made, which is the idea of history being written by the extroverts. Because one of the reasons that I wrote Quiet was out of the observation that introverts contribute to the world in so many different ways. Most writers, I would say, if we're talking about who's writing the history,
yeah, right. Literally speaking, yes,
are literally like they tend to be introverts, or they're at least sort of ambiverts who have a kind of introverted streak to them, and I think that these are people who are contributing because of their quiet way of being and not in spite of it. And
yeah, I think it's partly it's just a bad metaphor. I certainly don't mean that history is made by the extroverts, but just that you can get a very distorted sense of who's most important if you listen to the people making the most noise.